Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a really a highly charged political document in front of us.
I do.
It's coming out of the Caribbean nation of Antigua and Barbuda, and it outlines what the opposition there is calling a catastrophic diplomatic failure.
And this isn't just, your standard political back and forth.
Not at all.
This is the direct, immediate fallout from a major security decision made by the United States. It's a remarkable document.
It really is.
Because it functions as both a detailed political accusation and, at the same time, an historical accounting of what they claim is years of policy decay.
And just so you know what we're looking at, we are analyzing a press statement delivered by the opposition leader, Jamale Pringle.
Right. He's from the United Progressive Party, the UPP, and the statement is dated December 20, 2025.
So what's our mission with this deep dive?
I think our mission is to really dissect the UPP's core argument. And that argument is that these new, unprecedented, as they call them, U.S. visa restrictions are not an accident.
Right.
They're a direct consequence of years and years of neglected security warning.
Exactly. And the source material, this statement, it's reacting to what is clearly shocking news for the country.
A White House proclamation.
A White House proclamation that's going to implement serious visa restrictions on Antiguans and Barbudans. And what really creates the sense of crisis is the timing.
Yeah, the timing is brutal.
These rules are set to take effect starting January 1st, 2026.
Right over the holidays.
I mean, that calendar flip gives the nation almost no time to adjust. It creates instant political uncertainty, public confusion.
And that abruptness is a huge part of the political narrative here. So for you, listening to this deep dive is about quickly getting a sophisticated handle on how a government's internal decisions can have these massive international consequences.
And specifically, we're talking about how they manage these high-profile revenue programs.
Exactly. Things like citizenship by investment, the CIP, and just basic border security.
And the UPP's detailed arguments, well, they're our map. They're our guide to understanding what the opposition believes is the entire chain of events that led to what they're calling a diplomatic humiliation.
A humiliation, yeah.
So let's just jump right in. Let's start with the immediate crisis and this political blowback. Because the UPP, they don't start with diplomacy. They start with a very personal, very direct attack.
They absolutely do. But first, we have to establish just how serious this U.S. action is. The UPP keeps calling the visa restrictions unprecedented.
What does that actually suggest? That it's worse than anything before?
It suggests the scope and the severity go way beyond any prior diplomatic measures the U.S. has taken against the country. Now, the statement doesn't list every single visa class that's affected.
Like, B1 business visas or F1 student visas.
Right, it doesn't get into that level of detail. But the implication is that these restrictions are broad. They're going to affect average citizens, not just, a handful of political figures.
And that January 1st deadline just fuels the immediate uncertainty. For a country where easy travel to the U.S. is it's essential.
For everything.
For tourism, for business, for family connections. This is a seismic event.
And the UPP captures that public mood perfectly. They note that the nation remains unsettled by the news.
Unsettled. That phrase says so much, doesn't it?
It really does. It suggests the public gets it. They recognize the immediate disruption this is going to cause to their daily lives, their economic stability.
And that public anxiety is exactly what the opposition is trying to leverage.
Oh, absolutely. They immediately pivot from the external problem, the U.S. proclamation, to a domestic leadership failure. And this is where the narrative gets incredibly sharp.
The opposition leader, Jamale Pringle, draws a straight line from this diplomatic insult right back to the Prime Minister Gaston Browne.
It's a direct hit.
Mm-hmm.
The central blame is leveled squarely at the Prime Minister's demeanor, his leadership style. They pinned the whole thing on his alleged arrogance and dismissiveness.
Okay, so is this just, standard political mudslinging? Or does the UPP statement suggest that this leadership style actually got in the way of diplomatic negotiations?
Well, in high-stakes international relations, tone is often substance. The UPP is making the case that the Prime Minister's alleged arrogance meant he consistently failed to treat these international warnings with the seriousness they deserved.
Especially warnings coming from Washington.
Especially from Washington. They're suggesting he might have just dismissed these diplomatic communications as, minor irritations or political noise instead of what they were, substantive security concerns.
Which would imply a total breakdown in communication.
A profound breakdown, where the U.S. felt it had no choice but to just bypass diplomacy and move straight to a unilateral action like this proclamation.
So the core thesis Pringle is pushing is powerful and it's simple.
Very.
The country is now paying the price for what he claims were repeated warnings that were just willfully dismissed.
And they're framing the U.S. restrictions not as some unfortunate coincidence,
but as a deliberate and predictable outcome.
And this is the UPP's most memorable political soundbite, the one they're using to frame this entire debate.
This is not coincidence. This is consequence.
Exactly. By establishing that causality, the UPP tries to lock the responsibility squarely onto the administration's past actions. It turns a diplomatic crisis into a domestic political indictment.
They're demanding accountability for what they see as a completely predictable failure.
A predictable and preventable failure, in their view.
And crucially, the UPP immediately makes it about the people. They humanize the impact.
Yes, they shift the focus to the personal cost, claiming Antiguans and Barbudans are being singled out, humiliated, and punished.
That language is a really effective political tool.
Oh, it's very effective. It elevates the issue beyond some bureaucratic squabble into a matter of national dignity, of personal hardship.
Right. If you're a student trying to get to a university in the States, or a small business owner who relies on U.S. trade,
Or just visiting family.
you're now burdened by your government's alleged failures. The UPP is trying to position itself as the voice of that ordinary citizen, the one who's become collateral damage in all of this.
Collateral damage in the government's diplomatic missteps, exactly.
And what's equally significant is how the UPP analyzes what happened right after the announcement.
The immediate aftermath.
Yeah. They claim the public has been left further confused because of what they call mixed messaging from the administration.
Yes, and they don't just blame the government generally. They specifically point fingers at the Prime Minister and the Ambassador to the United States, Sir Ronald Sanders.
By naming both the top executive and the top diplomat, what are they implying?
They're implying that the government doesn't have a unified, honest story, that there's no coherent assessment of the situation.
So the public is left to just guess how bad this really is.
Exactly. The core claim is that the Prime Minister has tried to water down the gravity of the U.S. position through his public comments.
Okay, so what does watering down look like in a political context like this, specifically with visa restrictions?
It's a strategy of minimization. For instance, the U.S. proclamation might impose new restrictions on, let's say, multiple classes of visas, including ones vital for long-term business, student exchange, family reunification.
All the important ones.
The really critical ones. The Prime Minister, trying to manage the political fallout, might focus his public statements only on tourist visas. He might say, oh, most casual visitors will be fine, or suggest the restrictions are just temporary.
Or that they only apply to a few, high-risk people.
Right. The UPP's claim is that this kind of selective disclosure is an attempt to mask the devastating long-term impact on the nation's economic mobility and its international standing.
And the UPP connects this specific action, the alleged watering down, to the larger pattern of behavior they introduced earlier. They call it another display of the Prime Minister's high-handed approach.
It's all part of the same thesis. It's continuation. The UPP is basically saying, look, he ignored warnings because of his arrogance, which caused the crisis.
With a consequence.
Which is the consequence. And now he's denying the scope of that crisis because of his dismissiveness.
So for the UPP, the crisis management phase is just reinforcing the very leadership flaws that they claim caused the crisis in the first place.
And that, in their minds, further justifies their demand for a change in government. It's a very tight narrative.
Okay, let's pivot now from that immediate political clash to the more structural issues.
The lie behind the what?
Exactly. We need to analyze the UPP's broader claims connecting these U.S. restrictions to alleged systemic policy failures. This moves the conversation from the personality of the PM to the actual mechanisms of governance.
And to do that, we have to focus on the history the UPP provides. They emphasize that the party had repeatedly raised alarms over systemic weaknesses.
Suggesting this crisis was years in the making.
Absolutely. This is crucial for their credibility. They need to show they were ignored prophets, not just political opportunists jumping on a crisis.
And they narrow these warnings down to two main areas of international trust.
Two big ones.
The integrity of their Citizenship by Investment program, the CIP, and the integrity of their physical border security. So why are these two areas so inextricably linked when it comes to U.S. security concerns?
Because they really are two sides of the same security coin. The CIP allows the country to essentially sell sovereignty, It lets them grant citizenship and a passport.
Right.
So if the vetting for that passport is weak, it raises huge concerns about illicit finance, transnational crime, all of it. Border security, on the other hand, controls physical access. Who and what crosses your border, legally or illegally.
So if both systems are compromised?
The country becomes a recognized risk for everything from money laundering to human smuggling. It's seen as a weak link in the global security chain.
Okay, let's dig a little deeper into that CIP aspect. The UPP claims there was a dismantling of safeguards within that system. What are these safeguards, practically speaking, and what does it mean to dismantle them?
Well, in any globally accepted CIP, robust due diligence is multi-layered. It's not just one check. Typically, you're looking at least 4 tiers of background checks.
Okay, what's tier 1?
First, you have initial name screening.
Yeah.
You're checking against international watch lists, sanctions databases, things like that.
Standard procedure.
Should be. Second, you have enhanced checks. These are often outsourced to highly reputable international due diligence firms. They do a comprehensive check on the applicant's reputation, their business dealings, whether they're a politically exposed person, a P.
And the third tier would be?
Mandatory source of funds verification. You have to prove the wealth was acquired legally. This is a huge one for financial crime.
And the fourth layer?
The fourth layer is internal. It's the CIP unit's own compliance officers rigorously reviewing and cross-checking all the external findings. So, to dismantle safeguards could mean a lot of things.
Like cutting corners.
Exactly. The UPP's implied critique is that they might be reducing the number of databases checked, or maybe eliminating the requirement for that third-party international due diligence entirely.
Or just lowering the standards for verifying where the money came from.
Right. Or even canceling mandatory interviews that are meant to establish if the applicant is legitimate. Any of those steps would be a massive red flag to the U.S. and the EU.
Because it suggests the country is prioritizing speed and revenue over security.
Precisely.
Okay. And the second area, the erosion of border security. Beyond just a general idea of, lax controls, what specific institutional failures might the UPP be pointing to here?
Well, they could be referencing failures in biometric security systems at the airport, or inadequate training for customs and immigration officials.
Or, and this seems crucial, a lack of institutional oversight when it comes to travel documents.
That's a huge one. The inability to track large groups of transit travelers effectively, or, say, deficiencies in maritime surveillance to prevent illegal arrivals by sea, all of that falls under this banner.
So if the border is porous, then the CIP vetting,
however strict it is on paper, becomes irrelevant, because people can just bypass the official system entirely.
And this leads directly to the UPP's key predictive claim. They warn that international partners would eventually respond to these erosions.
Right. So the current U.S. action is presented as the ultimate fulfillment of a long-standing prophecy they claim to have made.
That predictive element is their golden ticket politically.
Absolutely. They could hold up the U.S. proclamation and say, see, we provided the diagnosis years ago, and now the consequence has arrived precisely as we warned.
And that narrative structure makes it very difficult for the sitting government to just dismiss this crisis as some sudden, unexpected geopolitical maneuver by the U.S.
Very difficult.
And to reinforce this whole narrative, they use previous diplomatic issues to show this isn't an isolated incident.
Yeah, they pull from history.
They point specifically to Canada's decision back in 2017 to impose visas. Why is that Canadian precedent so critical to the UPP's argument right now?
Because Canada's action in 2017 provides the historical anchor for their entire argument. Canada is a crucial security partner for the U.S., a Five Eyes member.
Right.
And its move to impose visa requirements years ago was a loud official signal of deep concern over the integrity of Antiguan travel documents.
So the UPP is using this to argue that the risk assessment on their country has been negative for years.
For years. Canada's action was likely driven by specific intelligence, perhaps about misuse of passports, maybe linked to organized crime or other security threats. So for the UPP, referencing this proves the government was given a stark warning, a dress rehearsal, if you will, but failed to correct the systemic flaws.
And now the U.S. has acted.
And now the U.S. has acted much more severely.
In diplomatic terms, losing visa-free access to a G7 nation is a massive downgrade.
It's a huge blow.
So when the UPP also brings up case 2, saying the European Union had also voiced security concerns, what specific issues were the EU likely raising that might be different from Canada or the U.S.?
The EU is typically laser-focused on anti-money laundering, AML, and counter-financing of terrorism, or CFT standards.
The financial side of things.
Exactly. While the U.S. and Canada worry a lot about illicit travel and physical security threats, the EU worries intensely about its regulated financial system being infiltrated.
So if the EU was voicing concerns,
It strongly suggests that the CIP was viewed as a potential loophole. A loophole allowing individuals from high-risk jurisdictions, or maybe those under sanctions, to get a passport, enter the European banking market, buy real estate, or set up legal structures without being detected.
so when you combine Canada's security concerns from 2017, the EU's financial integrity concerns, and now these unprecedented U.S. visa restrictions,
The UPP paints a very clear picture of a nation that has, in their view, systematically lost the trust of the world's most powerful security and economic blocs.
it's a very tight, multi-layered prosecutorial narrative.
It is. The current U.S. action is framed not as an external surprise, but as the inevitable climax of years of internal policy failures.
And this structure sets the stage perfectly for the most critical part of our deep dive.
The concrete evidence.
Exactly. The specific, memorable details, the alleged scandals that the UPP cites as definitive proof of this security meltdown.
This is where we move from general allegations to the specific points of evidence the UPP is using to fuel both international unease and domestic outrage.
They reference three distinct high-impact controversies.
Three, yeah.
Let's start with controversy A, which, this strikes at the very heart of what it means to be a sovereign nation.
It really does.
Allegations of illegal passport manufacturing, which has been called the outsourced document scandal. The specific claim is that Antigua and Barbudan passports were being illegally manufactured in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
That specific detail, that passports were allegedly being produced in another sovereign nation, is just staggering.
It's hard to believe.
The production of secure travel documents is one of the most protected functions a state performs. These documents contain complex, unique security features, and the entire production process has to have a rigorous chain of custody control.
So why does the alleged location, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, matter so much here?
Well, the location strongly implies a critical lapse in regulatory control. The UPP claims this happened outside proper oversight.
Which would be a massive breach.
A massive breach. If the government authorized passport production to take place in a foreign country, they would have had to maintain incredibly stringent security oversight of that facility, the staff, the printing plates, the stock of blank passport books, all of it.
And the allegation suggests that this oversight was either non-existent or criminally compromised.
Correct. And the security implication is immediate and severe.
Because if the manufacturing is compromised, then individuals, maybe criminal entities, could be creating documents using genuine or near-genuine materials.
Documents that look and feel authentic, but that were issued without any official vetting whatsoever.
And that's the key distinction, isn't it? A crude forgery is one thing.
A crude forgery is easy to spot. But a genuine-looking passport, manufactured illicitly, poses a massive threat because it can bypass initial electronic and visual security checks at airports all over the world.
So if international partners believe they can't trust the physical integrity of the Antiguan passport because of this breach,
it's an ironclad justification for immediate severe visa restrictions. They're effectively saying, we can't trust the document, so we have to vet the traveler directly every single time.
So this single controversy, if it's true, serves as overwhelming evidence for the UPP's claim that border security safeguards had been fundamentally compromised at the most basic level.
At the level of the document itself.
The document itself.
And it connects directly to that Canada 2017 precedent we talked about, which was also linked to concerns about passport integrity. The UPP is arguing that the problem never actually went away.
It just evolved.
It just evolved into this alleged illicit manufacturing operation, proving, in their view, that the government never regained control over its own sovereign documents.
Okay, let's move to controversy B, passports and criminal links. This one addresses the integrity of the CIP process itself, the vetting of failures.
Right. The specific claim here involves concerns about passports being granted to individuals who were allegedly linked to criminal activity. This is the ultimate failure of due diligence.
The whole point of the CIP is to attract legitimate investment, right?
Right, not to offer a security bypass for illicit actors.
So what kind of criminal links would trigger a response as severe as a U.S. proclamation? We're not talking about small-time fraud here, are we?
No, absolutely not. We're talking about high-level transnational threats. The concerns typically center on individuals linked to major organized crime syndicates, large-scale money laundering operations, or those trying to evade international sanctions.
The very type of individuals the EU was likely worried about.
Precisely. If, for example, a sanctioned Russian oligarch or a known figure in Asian organized crime manages to get citizenship, they gain mobility and access to global banking systems that they wouldn't otherwise have.
And the UPP is basically arguing that the dismantling of safeguards we discussed earlier is what allowed this to happen.
That it facilitated these grants. A fast-tracked, poorly vetted process makes it almost inevitable that bad actors will get through.
So it shows the direct consequence of a compromised CIT unit.
Yes. And the UPP's narrative suggests that the government continued to grant these passports even after receiving warnings, which validates their claim of the Prime Minister's dismissiveness.
And for the U.S., every passport granted to a criminal is seen as a deliberate act that jeopardizes their own national security.
Which makes the visa proclamation a necessary protective measure from their perspective. This specific evidence provides the motive for Washington's action.
Okay, let's tackle the third major controversy, which is the Phantom Airways narrative. This one speaks directly to the failure of border control, specifically regarding the movement of people.
Right. The UPP refers to claims tied to a so-called Phantom Antigua Airways narrative. Now, the use of the word phantom immediately implies something was off.
It implies an operation that was either highly non-transparent, very short-lived,
or maybe it was operating under the pretense of being a commercial airline while serving a different, potentially illicit purpose.
And the operation description focuses on West African arrivals and subsequent onward movement.
Right.
What are the security implications of that specific pattern?
That is a textbook pattern for human smuggling and irregular migration operations that are looking for routes into North America.
Right.
West Africa is a significant source region for individuals trying to reach the U.S. or Canada. If Antigua became a preferred transit point, it suggests a major vulnerability in their transit visa system or their border processing.
So the goal for these migrants wasn't to settle in Antigua?
Usually not. The goal is to use it as a brief staging area before securing onward travel, often to the U.S. or Mexico.
So the UPP is claiming that the country became, maybe inadvertently, maybe not, a soft spot in a global illicit travel network. A bottleneck.
A bottleneck, exactly. When the flights are labeled phantom, it implies that the government may not have had adequate visibility into the nature or purpose of these arrivals.
Right. Were they genuine tourists? Were they properly screened?
If large numbers of people arrive from high-risk regions and then immediately disappear via onward movement without establishing any legitimate reason for being in Antigua, international intelligence agencies are going to conclude that the country is failing to enforce its own immigration rules.
And that's a huge concern for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security.
A massive concern.
If they see a small island nation being exploited as a transit hub for people seeking illegal entry into North America, they will move very quickly to close that loophole.
The U.S. doesn't want to have to police Antigua's borders. They want Antigua to manage its own borders responsibly. So if the UPP's claims about this operation are accurate, the U.S. proclamation is a way of forcing that domestic confrontation.
By restricting the travel privileges of the entire nation until those structural border failures are fixed.
That's the tool. It's a very powerful form of diplomatic leverage.
Let's elaborate on that historical context one more time, because it really feels like the UPP is leveraging the Canada and EU actions to create this feeling of inevitability.
They are.
They're making the case that the current U.S. action is just a bigger hammer falling on the same old unaddressed problem.
That's the strategic use of history. Canada's 2017 visa imposition was a security-driven intervention. It was aimed at protecting Canada's territory and its border integrity.
And it was a direct consequence of perceived risks tied to the Antiguan passport.
Yes. So for the UPP, referencing 2017 lets them argue. The world started sounding the alarm then, but our government ignored it, focused only on short-term CIP revenues, and now we all face a much greater diplomatic and economic cost.
And the EU's concerns, being focused on money laundering and terror financing, add that whole other layer of financial pressure.
It means the administration wasn't just warned about security risks, but about risks to the nation's entire standing within the global financial system.
So if the UPP claims are true about them dismantling due diligence,
it means the country was potentially sacrificing its long-term financial reputation for short-term CIP gains. The EU's warnings reinforce the idea that global economic blocs already viewed the country as high risk for illicit finance, which just set the stage for the U.S. to act on its own parallel security concerns.
Let's cycle back to the immediate political reaction, because the UPP is making these very serious claims about the Prime Minister's arrogance. How does the critique like that play out in small island nation politics, where diplomatic relationships can be so deeply personal?
That's a great point. In that kind of environment, personal conduct can quickly become national policy. The UPP is suggesting that the PM's high-handedness meant he didn't just fail to address the technical issues.
But maybe he insulted or dismissed the actual envoys who are raising those issues.
Exactly. If a small nation's leader is perceived as unwilling to cooperate seriously on global security matters, especially something as serious as terrorism finance or human smuggling major allies, we'll conclude that bilateral dialogue is a waste of time.
And that unilateral force, like this proclamation, is the only effective tool they have left.
It's a last resort.
And the government's alleged attempt to water down the gravity of it all right after the announcement just confirms the UPP's narrative of denial.
It does.
They're arguing that the so-called solution being offered, which is to minimize the problem, is a continuation of the same mindset that created the problem in the first place.
It creates a political catch-22 for the ruling party. If they deny the severity, the UPP can point to the specific evidence, the illegal passports, the criminal links, and ask, if the situation is so minor, why did the U.S. cite these huge structural security failures?
But if they admit the severity,
they validate the UPP's entire claim of negligence. The UPP has skillfully used the U.S. action to force this domestic confrontation.
I want to spend a little more time drilling down into the mechanics of that illegal passport manufacturing claim. Because if genuine or near-genuine passports were being produced outside of sovereign control, what specific type of threat does that pose to international travel systems, like the one the U.S. uses?
This creates what security experts call an insider threat, or a supply chain compromise. Modern passports rely on complex technologies, biometric chips, special inks, watermarks.
All the stuff that's verified against international databases.
Right, like Interpol's Stolen and Lost Travel Documents database. If the illegal manufacturing used genuine materials or compromised official templates, the resulting document might actually pass an initial electronic screening at an airport kiosk or a border checkpoint.
So the UPP is alleging that the compromise was so deep it wasn't just about who got a passport, but whether any Antiguan passport could even be trusted.
Exactly. It implies a total collapse of document integrity, which is why the visa restriction would likely be so broad. The U.S. response would be, we can't distinguish between a legally vetted citizen and someone who got a high-quality, illicitly made document.
So everyone has to be vetted.
Everyone must be vetted through the costly, slow process of applying for a visa. It shifts the burden of proof entirely onto the traveler.
And let's tie that back to the claim about passports being granted to individuals with criminal links. This suggests the failure was layered.
It's institutional corruption in the vetting process and a security breach in the manufacturing process.
They're twin aspects of the same structural decay.
Absolutely. If the due diligence department is compromised, criminals can buy their way in. If the document production system is compromised, criminals who can't even pass the minimal vetting can still get their hands on authentic-looking documents.
So the UPP is painting a picture of a system that's just hemorrhaging security from multiple points all at the same time.
Simultaneously, yes.
Let's focus on the Phantom Antigua Airways narrative one more time, because this really speaks to the logistics of illicit human movement. When we talk about West African arrivals and onward movement, who are the key actors involved here, beyond the government?
This suggests the involvement of high-level smuggling and trafficking brokers. These are sophisticated networks that identify regulatory, weak spots, transit hubs that offer minimal scrutiny.
And they found one in Antigua, according to this claim.
That's the allegation. They then arrange for travelers to fly into the compromised hub on specialized charters or irregular flights. They spend minimal time there before securing the next leg of their journey, often using prearranged transit visas or by leveraging lax border control.
And the phantom nature of the airline
suggests that the financial motive for its operation was driven by these high smuggling fees, not by traditional commercial tourism.
So the UPP is using this controversy to highlight a failure in institutional capacity. It's not just about corruption, it's about the government being unable to track and manage these large, rapid movements of non-traditional travelers through its ports.
It's a failure of enforcement and of intelligence. The U.S. is extremely sensitive to changes in migration patterns that suggest new gateways are opening into the Americas.
And if they perceive that a key Caribbean ally is facilitating, even passively, the establishment of a new human smuggling corridor.
They will react severely to close it down. And often that means disrupting travel access for the citizens of that facilitating nation. The proclamation is designed to force the country to reassert control over its own airports and immigration systems.
So combining these three alleged failures, the external passport breach, the internal vetting corruption, and the airport and migration logistics failure, it provides the UPP with a pretty compelling and detailed argument for causality.
It moves the discussion entirely away from opinion and into evidence, however disputed that evidence may be by the government. The UPP has created a comprehensive dossier of alleged structural failures, all linked directly to the diplomatic consequence now faced by the entire nation.
And their political strategy is to show that the U.S. proclamation isn't the problem.
Right. It's merely the symptom of the administration's long-standing security negligence.
And that claim that Antiguans and Barbudans are being singled out, humiliated, and punished, that's the political mechanism designed to turn this diplomatic issue into a domestic electoral challenge.
It absolutely is. It externalizes the blame for the public's suffering onto the U.S. while internalizing the responsibility onto the current administration. The UPP effectively positions itself as the defender of the common citizen who is now unfairly penalized for the mistakes of the political elite.
Which is a very powerful emotional strategy, especially in small democracies.
Very powerful.
Okay, let's circle back and synthesize this. This has been a really focused deep dive into the UPP's press statement.
It has.
We started with the immediate shock of that White House proclamation and the severe January 1st, 2026 deadline for these unprecedented visa restrictions.
And we established the opposition's political framework for all of this. The crisis was entirely attributed to the Prime Minister's arrogance and dismissiveness.
Which cemented their narrative that this is not coincidence, this is consequence.
Right. We then explored the alleged structural decay, focusing on the dismantling of CIP due diligence safeguards and the erosion of border security, which the UPP claims they repeatedly warned against.
And to reinforce that claim, we analyzed the historical context the UPP provided using Canada's 2017 visa imposition and previous European Union security concerns.
To show a long-term, recognizable pattern of international distrust that they argue was driven by Antiguan policy.
And finally, we dissected the specific, concrete evidence the UPP is using to prove these systemic failures.
The shocking claims of illegal passport manufacturing in St. Vincent.
The failure of vetting that led to passports for individuals with alleged criminal links.
And that highly concerning narrative surrounding the Phantom Antigua Airways operation tied to West African arrivals and illicit onward movement.
It's a complete narrative arc.
It is, from internal decay, through ignored warnings, to what they see as inevitable international punishment. The UPP has detailed the alleged mechanism of failure with incredible specificity.
So what does this all mean for you, the informed observer, as this very complex story develops? The UPP has meticulously laid out a case not just against the government's competence, but against the very integrity of the state's security apparatus itself.
And that's the critical shift here. If the UPP has detailed these specific historical security allegations about document production failure, criminal infiltration, and irregular migration logistics, the political focus can no longer rest solely on whether the U.S. proclamation was justified.
The demand now shifts. It becomes entirely about domestic accountability.
Precisely. The core question for the sitting government and for the entire nation becomes, how do you definitively publicly account for the alleged years-long erosion of those security safeguards?
How do you regain control over your passport printing process or demonstrate that you have robust vetting standards when the opposition has provided this specific historical timeline of alleged failures?
The debate is now less about diplomacy with the U.S. and much more about transparent governance regarding those specific security breaches. So you should be watching to see if the government engages with those specific historical claims, or if the debate just remains focused on minimizing the gravity of the U.S. restrictions.
Because that's where the true deep dive begins.